Hi, folks. Doing this on a rare evening session. Normally I do these in the morning. But I kind of felt the need to, this has been the only time I've had available, and I kind of felt the need to put something out there. This is going to be a publicly available video on Patreon, just so you're aware. So, anyway. A couple of days ago, we in the poetry community learned of the loss of Robert Bly, an incredibly influential poet. I don't need to tell a lot of you who are here. My light source is fading over here. I don't need to tell a lot of you who are here who Robert Bly was or what he brought to the table in American poetry, how influential he has been in so many ways. I first saw and met Robert Bly when I was about 15 years old. A student teacher at my high school brought me and a number of other students to see him read at Worcester State College at the time. It's now Worcester State University. And I had been dabbling in poetry, but this was my first chance to sort of see an authentic, well-known poet. So this would have been about 1975. Bly was already at the height of his popularity, if not a little even past it, based on his Vietnam War, anti-Vietnam War work, but he was huge at that point. But there weren't very many people there to see that reading, and I remember being 15 years old and sitting there and being enthralled by what I was seeing and hearing. Bly was an amazing performer. There's videos of him online you should go look at. And I think it was with him that I first saw the sort of intensity of what it meant to read poetry in a performance style. Playing music, masks, performing with musicians on occasion. These are things that he did that were absolutely mind-blowing to a 15-year-old who experience of poetry was like reading your poetry in your school class. And I have never forgotten what the impact of that initial reading was. To give you a sense of that in an amusing way is to note that, my light source just died, so I might as well just take that off. One of the things I might note about that is that at one point I looked over and I was sitting in the front row of the little group that was watching him read. There were maybe 20 people there, and a woman was breastfeeding. I was 15 years old, and I turned right back to the poetry and paid no more attention to that because that was what was fascinating to me. Adolescent boy. Anyway, I saw Bly again and again and again over a number of years. And every time I went to see him, I would bring a book of his poetry to have him sign. And I've got a fairly good collection of signed Bly volumes in my library. Most of them are in storage right now, just because of room. But there's one book that he is associated with that I always have with me, and it means an awful lot to me because it usually sits right by my bedside at all times, regardless of what else is there. And that would be this book. This is News of the Universe. It is it's a book of, it's an anthology called Poems of Twofold Consciousness, where he talked a lot about associative poetry and surrealism and the idea of leaps within poetry. He has another book that's called Leaping Poetry. But it's a compendium of amazing poets from all over the world and various cultures, indigenous cultures and things like that. And it's a formative book for me. It came out in 1980. I was 20. And like I said, you can see it's beat. I've got duct tape holding it together. And it's been poured coffee on and every other thing. But it's unlike any other book he ever signed for me. And I've puzzled over this many times over the years. Because if you look at the front piece of it, it says News of the Universe. That's pretty much all it says on it. And then it says, for Tony. Now, like I said, he signed all of my books. That's nothing unusual. But then there's this drawing of this creature on a mountaintop. And over here, it says, some being in a high wind. And then his signature. And at the time, and Bly was a notoriously quirky and irascible person, controversial. I mean, some of you are familiar, obviously, with Iron John and the whole men's movement that grew out of some of his work, which I have mixed feelings about. A lot of mixed feelings, more than I'm going to share here. But his work is so good overall. So this was mystifying to me because it's the only book I have like this where he sort of did something more personal than just a For Tony type of signature with his signature on it. And for years I've thought about that as just a quirky drawing that Bly did. But he had seen me at a lot of readings at that point and recognized me from a lot of readings at that point. Like I said, I was 20 and I'd been seeing him since I was 15. And so over 5 years I'd seen him a lot because he used to travel around and do all the colleges in this area quite a bit. And looking at this book again, I went and dug it out after I heard the news of his death. And I looked at it again. And for the very first time, and it's probably just projection on my part, I said to myself, maybe he put that there, because he said to me, he says, "There, that's for you." And he had a very distinctive, gruff, abrupt sort of speaking style. He said, "This is for you. That's for you." He made a personal gesture with it. And for the very first time in my life, after hearing of his death, I looked at it and I said, maybe the whole inscription is for Tony, some being in a high wind. Maybe he saw me as a being in a high wind, and I thought about that a lot over the last day or so, thinking about the possibility that what he was saying was that he saw me as someone buffeted or dealing with high winds. And certainly, I mean, you could say that for anybody, but for me, I certainly looked at it and said, wow, that's a good metaphor for an awful lot of what my life has been like. Many of you know that I've been working on a manuscript, and there are some of you who have joined up recently to be part of the $10 and up tier, where we've been talking about the manuscripts, and I think I've got the title. I think the title of my manuscript is going to be Some Being in a High Wind. I want to leave you with my favorite poem by Bly, and there are many, but this one, it's a later poem. I just adore this. This is The Russian. I actually have one of the lines from this printed on a t-shirt that is unfortunately too small for me, so I can't wear it. Really, I've never worn it because it's a little too small for me, but Chris Lawton, who's on here and is also one of my, my bandmate in the band, gave it to me one year. The Russian. The Russians had few doctors on the front line. My father's job was this. After the battle was over, he'd walk among the men hit, sit down and ask, "Would you like to die on your own in a few hours, or should I finish it?" Most said, "Don't leave me." The two would have a cigarette. He'd take out his small notebook. We had no dog tags, you know. And write the man's name down, his wife's, his children, his address, and what he wanted to say. When the cigarette was done, the soldier would turn his head to the side. My father finished off 400 men that way during the war. He never went crazy. These were his people. He came to Toronto. My father in the summers would stand on the lawn with a hose watering the grass that way. It took a long time. He talked to the moon, to the wind. "I can hear you growing," he'd say to the grass. "We come and go. We're no different from each other. We are all part of something. We have a home." When I was 13, I said, "Dad, do you know they've invented sprinklers now?" He went on watering the grass. "This is my life. Just shut up if you don't understand it." From Some Being in a High Wind to you all, onward.